Hong Kong is under lockdown, and it's not just because of the coronavirus. The Chinese Communist Party is taking over. This is China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Well, it's been a long coronavirus lockdown. But hey, spring is here. The snow is melting, flowers are blooming, and protesters are returning to the streets of Hong Kong. Nature is glorious. May 1st was Labor Day in Hong Kong, and about 200 protesters gathered in the Sha Tin Mall for a sing-along protest. Police responded with pepper spray. In fact, about 3,000 riot officers equipped with tear gas, rubber bullets, and water cannons were deployed. Now that might seem like an overreaction to a sing-along, but nothing is more dangerous to an authoritarian regime than the power of song. After all, that's how David Hasselhoff single-handedly tore down the Berlin Wall. A truly great moment in history. But back to Hong Kong. It's been a year since Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam pushed a controversial extradition bill. That bill would have allowed the Chinese government to extradite Hong Kong residents for trial in mainland China, where justice is blind. Excuse me, where justice is blinded. Anyway, anger over that Hong Kong extradition bill led to protests, including a gigantic protest on June 9th last year, with more than 1 million people in the streets. As the protests continued week after week, Hong Kong police got more and more aggressive. Within a few months, protesters had turned their anger from the local government and Carrie Lam to the real power masters, the Chinese Communist Party. That was a big problem for the CCP. You know, it's not that they haven't dealt with student protesters before, but with international attention fixed on Hong Kong, their hands were tied this time. But then, a miracle happened. A deadly virus escaped from Wuhan, China, through no fault of the Communist Party, of course. You see, a bat sneezed on a pangolin in Wuhan, or possibly Italy. And also the pangolin was in the US military. So obviously, this was America's fault, just like the Hong Kong protests. Anyway, the CCP virus brought a temporary halt to the mass protests in Hong Kong, and international media had another focus.
It's not just that stores ran out of toilet paper early on in this pandemic, it's that there's been a total lack of supply.
And while we've all been fighting over toilet paper, the CCP has quietly turned Hong Kong into a prison. What? You expected them to be busy fighting the coronavirus? Over the past several months, the Communist Party has taken advantage of the shift in media attention from Hong Kong to the coronavirus. They've taken concrete steps to annihilate the Hong Kong protest movement. Now, technically, they had agreed not to do that. Hong Kong's basic law, essentially their constitution, guarantees Hong Kong gets to run separately from the rest of China until the year 2047. That's called one country, two systems. I know which of the two systems I prefer. But it's clear Hong Kong is already getting very close to one country, one system. Beijing has two main representative offices in Hong Kong. Those are the Hong Kong Liaison Office and the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. And guess what? The two guys in charge of those departments during the protests last year? Well, they've been fired. The CCP has installed a new head of the Hong Kong Liaison Office, a guy named Luo Huining. Turns out he's very loyal to Chinese leader Xi Jinping. He helped lead Xi's anti-corruption campaign in Shanxi province. That's why he's got a reputation as a bit of an enforcer. Luo Huining has a record of using hardline tactics to resolve tough problems for the Chinese Communist Party. But every abbot needs his Costello, which is why Luo will be teamed up with Xia Baolong. He's been appointed as the new head of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office. I think he'll do a really good job. His qualifications include toppling Christian churches. Yeah, like I said, he's very qualified. And Abbott and Costello here have already shown their hand. They've said they have supervisory power over the Hong Kong government. What does that mean? China's liaison office said the high degree of autonomy that the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region enjoys, including its legislative power, all comes from and is authorized by the central government. In other words, we made you, we can unmake you. That's a solid basis for any constitution. But since Beijing's offices in Hong Kong declared they had supervisory power in Hong Kong, they've been issuing statements criticizing the protests, like when they slammed shoppers' support for pro-democracy businesses as violating free market principles. Yes, people choosing where to shop is a terrible violation of the free market, says a communist government. Although these statements seem petty, the problem is they're normalizing the erosion of one country, two systems. But that's not all. The CCP has also been pushing a, quote, national security law. That national security law is called Article 23. It would prohibit any act of treason, secession, sedition, subversion against the Chinese government in Hong Kong. Now, if that sounds to you like they're trying to make it illegal to criticize the Chinese Communist Party, you would be right. That's why 500,000 Hong Kongers protested when the government first tried to pass it in 2003, which at the time forced the government to back down. But the CCP and the Hong Kong government have never given up on passing Article 23, and they've been talking about it more and more over the last year. Maybe the Communist Party is just getting to the point where they don't care about protests or keeping up any semblance of one country, two systems. And if you look at what's been happening over the past few months, it sure looks that way. In a single day in April, they arrested 15 pro-democracy leaders for participating in last year's protests. That included Martin Lee, an 81-year-old man who was guilty of being in a protest with 1.7 million other people. Ironically, back in the day, Martin Lee helped draft Hong Kong's basic law. But don't worry, Hong Kong police don't just target elderly people. Last year, they arrested a 13-year-old girl. So have authorities now effectively nipped the Hong Kong protest movement in the bud? Probably not. With cases of the coronavirus on the decline, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam made the unfortunate announcement that Hong Kong will gradually begin opening up again. I say unfortunate because it was unfortunate for a leader so despised to make that announcement in front of a green screen. I mean, just imagine what internet users might do with that image or video if, say, we accidentally put a downloadable link in the description below this YouTube video. But this means we're likely going to see a new wave of protests hitting Hong Kong. Hong Kong police are already preparing. The force is also reassembling its core squad of 6,000 riot control officers to prepare for possible unrest on the two most politically charged anniversaries of the year, in June and July. Those are the annual protests on June 4th for the Tiananmen Square massacre, and July 1st, the anniversary of when the British government handed Hong Kong over to China in 1997, throwing Hong Kong into this mess. The U.S. is preparing as well. Last year, the U.S. Congress unanimously passed the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. Part of it was an annual review of Hong Kong's situation to see if it still really is autonomous from mainland China or not. The law says that if Hong Kong is no longer autonomous, the U.S. will then treat Hong Kong as part of mainland China, meaning it would be subject to the same trade tariffs on mainland China. That would hit the Hong Kong economy hard, and it's already dealing with a possible worst recession ever as a side effect of the coronavirus. And that might make Hong Kong's communist overlords a little nervous. The best way to scare a communist is to threaten to take away their money. So, maybe Senator Ted Cruz is right when he says Hong Kong is the new Berlin. Hold on. If Hong Kong is the new Berlin, does that make me Hong Kong's David Hasselhoff? What's that, Shelley? Only if I sing Looking for Freedom while standing above the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge. Challenge accepted. And now it's time for me to answer a question from one of you, a fan who supports China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Kaz Redclaw asks, if YouTube stops just demonetizing things and starts actually censoring things, will you start throwing your videos on one of the other platforms as well? Ibri, BitChute, PeerTube, etc. Oh boy, that is a good question. We struggle a lot with demonetization. We wouldn't still be making the show if it weren't for the direct support of fans like you. So in addition to demonetization, there have been cases where YouTube has age-restricted our videos. That means the only way to see the episode is if you are logged into a YouTube account and are over 18. That kills the views on a video. Our recent episode, The Coronavirus Cure Isn't Authoritarianism, was age-restricted like this. It's an episode about how Western media have been promoting China's authoritarian coronavirus crackdown as an option for America, and why that's a bad idea. It also had footage of Chinese police beating up and restraining people. Clearly a violation of YouTube's community guidelines, except for all the other media who posted the same or very similar footage on YouTube and did not get age restricted. And in February, YouTube had actually completely removed one of our videos, which criticized how Chinese authorities were beating people up. But after we made a big stint about it on social media, YouTube put it back up and age restricted it. Other ways YouTube censors our show are more subtle. They've been unsubscribing people secretly, so make sure you're still subscribed. They also don't push out notifications of new episodes to subscribers even if they have notifications on. I know we're not the only show having these problems, and in many ways it seems to be getting worse. So what will we do? Well, we're looking into developing our own website for all of our shows, China Uncensored, America Uncovered, and the China Unscripted podcast. But that's a lot of work, and I don't know if we'd get the same traffic as we do on YouTube. But regardless, I really hope that YouTube can do better and stop censoring content creators. Otherwise, I wouldn't be surprised if at some point the US government starts to get involved. And that's not a great situation to be in. Thanks for your question, Kaz. And thank you for watching. So as I said, if you can, please help support China Uncensored by joining what I call the China Uncensored 50-cent Army on patreon.com/China Uncensored. You can ask me a question that I might answer on the show. Plus there are some cool other perks as well, like the music from the show. So, once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.